In the autumn of 1853, when Sacramento County was still finding its footing amid the chaos of the gold rush, a mystery unfolded that would haunt the region for generations. The official records, archived in the basement of what was then the territorial courthouse, tell only fragments of the story. What remains are scattered testimonies, property deeds marked with unusual annotations, and a series of letters that somehow survived a fire that consumed most of the municipal building in 1867. The Maddox family had arrived in Sacramento in the spring of 1852, part of the endless stream of hopeful souls drawn west by promises of fortune beneath California soil. Jonah Maddox, a man of 34 years, had purchased 40 acres along the American River, approximately 8 miles northeast of the growing settlement. The land deed, preserved in the county archives, bears his signature in careful script alongside that of his wife, Rachel Maddox, aged 29. According to a census fragment recovered from the state archives, the Maddox property included a modest 2-story wooden structure, a barn, and what the surveyor's notes describe as a root cellar of unusual depth. The house sat on a slight rise overlooking a bend in the river, surrounded by oak trees that provided shade during the brutal summer months. Neighbors were few and far between in that stretch of countryside, with the nearest settlement being a small mining camp called Hangtown Crossing, roughly 3 miles to the south. Contemporary accounts from the Sacramento Union newspaper, dating to the summer of 1852, mention Jonah Maddox in passing. He had registered a modest mining claim and appeared to be making a decent living panning for gold along his section of the river. Those who knew him described a quiet man, methodical in his work, who kept largely to himself and his wife. The couple attended Sunday services at the makeshift Presbyterian chapel in town, though according to the pastor's journal, discovered years later among church documents, they rarely spoke to other congregants. Rachel Maddox left even fewer traces in the historical record. An invoice from Morrison's General Store, dated August 1852, shows purchases of fabric, thread, and household supplies charged to the Maddox account. The store owner's ledger, preserved by his descendants, contains brief notations about Mrs. Maddox being a woman of few words but prompt payment. One notation, written in different ink, adds, "Seems always in a hurry to return home." The first sign that something was amiss came in early September 1853. Thomas Kellerman, who ran a small operation panning for gold downstream from the Maddox property, reported to the territorial marshal that he had not seen smoke from the Maddox chimney for nearly a week. This detail, recorded in a report that survived the courthouse fire, might seem insignificant. But September nights in the Sacramento Valley could be cold, and every household maintained fires for cooking and warmth. Kellerman's concern deepened when he realized he had not heard the familiar sounds that typically carried across the water from the Maddox property. No axe splitting wood, no voices calling across the yard, no sounds of daily life that had become part of the natural rhythm of the area. When he mentioned this to others at Hangtown Crossing, several miners confirmed they too had noticed the unusual silence from the direction of the Maddox place. The territorial marshal, a man named Samuel Wright, made the journey to the Maddox property on September 15, 1853. His report, written in precise handwriting on official letterhead, describes finding the house apparently undisturbed from the outside. The front door was closed but not locked, the windows intact, the barn door secured. Everything appeared normal, except for the complete absence of human activity. Wright's initial search revealed that the house had been abandoned, but not hastily. Clothes hung neatly in the wardrobe, dishes sat clean in the cupboard, and beds were made with military precision. The marshal noted that valuable items remained untouched, including a small wooden box containing approximately $30 in gold dust and coins. What troubled Wright was the complete absence of personal belongings that travelers typically carried, such as letters, photographs, or family mementos. The root cellar mentioned in the original property survey drew Wright's attention during his second visit to the property. The heavy wooden door, accessed by stone steps that led down from behind the house, had been secured with an iron bar. When Wright managed to pry it open, he discovered a storage area that extended much deeper into the earth than typical cellars of the period. His report mentions shelves lined with preserved foods, barrels of grain, and several wooden crates whose contents he did not detail in his official documentation. Among the items found in the cellar was a leather-bound journal, water-damaged and partially illegible. The few pages that remained readable contained entries in two different handwritings, presumably those of Jonah and Rachel Maddox. The entries, dated from their arrival in 1852 through August 1853, describe the daily routine of frontier life, but contain several references that Wright found puzzling. One entry, written in what appeared to be Rachel's handwriting, mentioned sounds from below and the knocking that starts after midnight. A letter discovered between the pages of the journal, addressed to someone identified only as J.M. in Philadelphia, was never sent. The letter, dated August 20th, 1853, contained detailed descriptions of their life in California, but ended abruptly mid-sentence. The final legible words were, "We have discovered something in the lower chamber that changes everything about this place. Jonah insists we cannot leave now, but I fear we cannot stay. The sounds have grown stronger, and yesterday I found." The territorial marshal's investigation continued for several weeks, but yielded few additional clues. Interviews with neighbors confirmed that the Maddoxes had been seen in town as recently as early September, making their usual purchases and appearing in normal health. No one reported seeing them leave the property with wagons or horses that would indicate a planned departure. Their livestock, including 2 horses and several chickens, were found dead in the barn, apparently from dehydration and starvation. Wright's final report, filed in November 1853, concluded that Jonah and Rachel Maddox had likely left their property voluntarily, though he acknowledged that their destination and the reason for their departure remained unknown. The case was officially closed, and the property eventually reverted to the territorial government when taxes went unpaid. The land was subsequently sold to a mining company that operated briefly in the area before abandoning their claims in 1855. However, the story of the Maddox property did not end with the official closure of the case. Throughout the 1850s and 60s, the abandoned house attracted occasional visitors, including prospectors looking for temporary shelter and treasure hunters convinced that the couple had buried gold somewhere on the property. Several of these individuals reported strange experiences that found their way into local folklore and occasional newspaper accounts. A story published in the Sacramento Union in 1857 described the experience of 2 miners who had sheltered in the abandoned Maddox house during a winter storm. According to their account, they heard sounds coming from beneath the floorboards throughout the night, sounds they described as similar to someone digging or moving heavy objects. When they investigated the cellar the following morning, they found evidence that the wooden crates had been moved, though they could not determine by whom or when. Another account, preserved in the personal papers of a local minister, describes a visit to the property in 1859 by a group of men searching for salvageable lumber. The minister, who accompanied the group, reported that they discovered additional chambers in the cellar that had not been mentioned in the official investigation. These chambers, carved into the hillside beyond the main cellar, contained what the minister described as arrangements of stones and symbols that suggested purposes we could not fathom. The minister's account, found among documents donated to the Sacramento Historical Society in 1928, includes sketches of the symbols discovered in the underground chambers. The drawings show arrangements of stones in geometric patterns, along with carved markings on the chamber walls that resembled no known alphabet or symbolic system familiar to the minister or his companions. The minister noted that the air in these chambers felt thick and oppressive, and that one member of their group became violently ill after spending only a few minutes underground. By 1860, the Maddox property had gained such a disturbing reputation that even desperate prospectors avoided the place. The house gradually fell into disrepair, with windows broken by weather and vandals, and the roof developing leaks that eventually led to structural damage. The cellar entrance, however, remained intact and was observed by passing travelers to be sealed with heavy stones that appeared to have been placed there deliberately. A significant development occurred in 1863, when a team of archaeologists from San Francisco arrived to investigate reports of Indian burial chambers on the former Maddox property. Led by Dr. Harrison Blackwood, a professor of antiquities, the team spent 3 weeks conducting excavations around the house and in the mysterious underground chambers. Their findings, summarized in a report submitted to the California Geological Survey, contradicted local assumptions about the origin of the underground structures. Dr. Blackwood's team determined that the chambers beneath the Maddox cellar were not Native American burial sites, but rather constructions of much more recent origin. The stonework showed tool marks consistent with European techniques, and the mortar used in the construction contained materials that could only have been obtained locally within the previous 20 years. Most significantly, the team discovered that the chambers extended much further underground than anyone had previously suspected, forming a complex network of tunnels and rooms carved into the hillside. The archaeologist's report, archived at the University of California, describes the discovery of numerous personal items within the deepest chambers, including clothing, tools, and household goods that appeared to have been carefully arranged rather than hastily abandoned. Among these items were several pieces that the team was able to identify as belonging to the Maddox family, including a silver locket engraved with the initials R.M. and a leather Bible with Jonah Maddox written on the first page. Dr. Blackwood's most disturbing discovery came in the chamber farthest from the cellar entrance. There, his team found evidence of what appeared to be a workshop or laboratory, complete with shelving, work tables, and an array of tools whose purpose they could not readily identify. The professor's notes describe instruments of brass and iron arranged with scientific precision, suggesting experiments of a nature we cannot comprehend. The chamber also contained numerous journals and notebooks filled with detailed observations and measurements, written in handwriting that matched samples from the journal found in the main cellar. The contents of these journals, according to Dr. Blackwood's summary, revealed that Jonah Maddox had been conducting some form of systematic investigation in the underground chambers. The entries described careful measurements of temperature, humidity, and air pressure at various depths below ground. They also contained detailed drawings of the stone arrangements found in different chambers, along with notations about changes in these arrangements over time. Most troubling to Dr. Blackwood was a series of entries describing emanations detected in certain chambers, particularly during specific atmospheric conditions. Maddox had apparently developed theories about connections between these underground phenomena and various environmental factors, including lunar cycles, seasonal changes, and weather patterns. His final entries, dated in late August 1853, expressed growing concern about what he termed accelerating resonances that seemed to be building towards some kind of climax. The archaeological team's work was interrupted in early October 1863, when Dr. Blackwood himself disappeared while working alone in the deepest chamber. His colleagues found his notebook abandoned on the work table, along with his tools and personal effects, but no trace of the professor himself. A search of the entire underground complex yielded no clues to his whereabouts. The remaining team members, thoroughly unsettled by this development, sealed the chamber entrances and abandoned the excavation. The official report filed by Dr. Blackwood's assistant describes the decision to seal the underground chambers as a safety precaution, given the unstable nature of some of the deeper tunnels. However, a personal letter discovered years later among the assistant's papers reveals a different motivation. In the letter, addressed to his wife, the assistant describes growing apprehension among the team about the nature of their discoveries and specifically about changes they observed in Dr. Blackwood's behavior during his final days at the site. According to the assistant's private account, Dr. Blackwood had become increasingly obsessed with his work in the underground chambers, spending entire nights below ground and emerging with detailed notes about phenomena that his colleagues could neither observe nor measure. The professor spoke of hearing sounds that others could not detect and claimed to have discovered patterns in the stone arrangements that suggested an intelligence actively modifying the environment for purposes unknown. The assistant's letter describes finding Dr. Blackwood on several occasions engaged in conversation with empty chambers, responding to voices that no one else could hear. When confronted about this behavior, the professor insisted that he was making contact with previous occupants who were providing crucial information about the nature of the underground complex. The assistant noted that Dr. Blackwood's final journal entries were written in a mixture of English and symbols that resembled those found carved on the chamber walls. After Dr. Blackwood's disappearance, the property returned to its former state of abandonment. The entrance to the underground chambers was sealed with heavy stones and mortar, and official warnings were posted discoursing trespassing on the site. Local authorities, already weary of the problems associated with the former Maddox property, were eager to discourage further investigation or exploration of the area. However, the story continued to evolve through the testimony of individuals who ventured onto the property despite official warnings. In 1865, a group of Confederate veterans passing through the area while traveling to mining claims in Nevada reported observing lights moving through the ruins of the Maddox house at night. When they investigated, they found evidence that someone had been living in the partially collapsed structure, including recent ashes in the fireplace and food scraps that appeared fresh. The veteran's account, recorded in a letter sent to relatives in Missouri, describes discovering a narrow opening in the sealed cellar entrance, apparently created by removing several of the stones used to block access to the underground chambers. Fresh tool marks around the opening suggested that someone had been systematically working to reopen the sealed passages. The veterans reported hearing sounds from below ground that they described as mechanical in nature, as if someone were operating machinery in the depths. A more detailed investigation was conducted in 1866 by territorial marshals responding to reports of strange activities at the abandoned property. Their report describes finding the cellar entrance partially reopened and evidence of recent human activity throughout the underground complex. Footprints in the dust suggested that at least one person had been moving regularly through the chambers, and several of the sealed deeper passages had been cleared of debris. Most significantly, the marshals discovered that someone had been continuing the work begun by Dr. Blackwood's archaeological team. New measurements and observations had been added to the journals found in the underground workshop, written in handwriting that did not match any of the previous occupants or investigators. These new entries describe phenomena occurring in the chambers that seemed to correlate with specific dates and times, suggesting that whoever was making these observations was following a systematic schedule. The Marshal's report notes that the underground complex appeared to have been expanded since Dr. Blackwood's investigation. New passages had been carved into the hillside, extending the network of chambers further beneath the surrounding landscape. The stonework in these new areas showed the same careful craftsmanship as the original construction, suggesting that whoever was responsible possessed considerable skill and knowledge of underground construction techniques. However, the Marshals were unable to locate whoever was responsible for these activities. Despite conducting searches of the entire underground complex and maintaining surveillance of the property for several nights, they found no evidence of current occupation. The mysterious individual or individuals seemed to appear and disappear without leaving obvious traces of their coming and going. The Marshals did make one disturbing discovery during their investigation. In the deepest accessible chamber, they found what appeared to be a shrine or memorial, constructed from stones arranged in the same geometric patterns found throughout the underground complex. At the center of this arrangement were personal items that the Marshals were able to identify as having belonged to Dr. Blackwood, including his pocket watch and a distinctive brass compass that his colleagues had mentioned in their reports. Surrounding these items were photographs and personal belongings that appeared to represent other individuals, though the Marshals could not immediately identify who they might be. Among these items were a woman's hair ribbon that matched descriptions of items owned by Rachel Maddox, and a small carved wooden box that territorial records indicated had been among Jonah Maddox's possessions when he first registered his mining claim. The arrangement suggested that whoever was maintaining this underground shrine considered Dr. Blackwood, the Maddox family, and possibly others to be somehow connected in their fate. The Marshals noted that the personal items appeared to have been carefully preserved and were arranged with obvious reverence, as if the unknown individual was honoring the memory of people who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. By 1867, local authorities had concluded that the former Maddox property represented a continuing safety hazard and a source of persistent disturbance to public peace. The decision was made to permanently seal all access to the underground chambers and to demolish what remained of the house and other structures. A crew of workers was hired to fill the cellar entrance with concrete and to remove any materials that might attract future trespassers. However, the demolition work was never completed. The construction crew reported encountering persistent technical difficulties that prevented them from properly sealing the underground chambers. Concrete poured into the cellar entrance would mysteriously drain away overnight, as if flowing into hidden passages or chambers. When workers attempted to excavate the area to understand where the concrete was going, they discovered that the underground complex was far more extensive than any previous investigation had revealed. The foreman's report, filed with the Territorial Engineering Office, describes finding evidence of underground passages that extended for hundreds of feet in multiple directions from the main cellar area. Some of these passages appeared to connect with natural caves in the hillside, while others showed clear evidence of human construction. Most puzzling to the construction crew was evidence that work on expanding these passages was continuing even as they attempted their demolition efforts. Fresh tool marks on chamber walls, newly carved passages, and recently moved stones suggested that someone was actively working to expand and modify the underground complex, even while official efforts were underway to seal it permanently. The workers reported hearing sounds of distant excavation during their own work, though they were never able to locate the source of these sounds or identify who might be responsible. The construction foreman's final report recommended abandoning the demolition effort, citing safety concerns and the impossibility of completely sealing such an extensive underground system. The report also noted that several members of the crew had experienced health problems while working in the underground chambers, including severe headaches, nausea, and disorientation that seemed to worsen the deeper they ventured into the complex. Following the failed demolition effort, the property was officially abandoned by territorial authorities. A fence was constructed around the immediate area, and signs were posted warning of dangerous underground conditions. However, these precautions proved inadequate to prevent continued interest in the site. Throughout the late 1860s and early 1870s, occasional reports surfaced of individuals venturing onto the property and discovering that access to the underground chambers remained possible. A particularly detailed account from 1871 comes from a traveling minister who became lost during a winter storm and sought shelter in what remained of the surface structures. The minister's journal, preserved among papers donated to a Methodist Historical Society, describes spending 3 days on the property while waiting for the weather to clear. During this time, he reported observing evidence of ongoing activity in the underground chambers. According to the minister's account, he heard regular sounds of movement beneath the ground throughout his stay, particularly during the hours between midnight and dawn. These sounds included what he described as measured footsteps moving through passages below, the sound of stones being moved and rearranged, and occasionally what seemed to be voices speaking in tones too low to understand. The minister noted that these sounds followed patterns that suggested purposeful activity rather than random settlement or natural phenomena. The minister also reported observing lights visible through cracks and gaps in the sealed cellar entrance during nighttime hours. These lights appeared to move through the underground passages in systematic patterns, as if someone were conducting regular inspections or maintenance of the complex. When the minister attempted to investigate more closely, he discovered that the official seals on the cellar entrance had been repeatedly modified to allow access while maintaining the appearance of being intact. Most intriguingly, the minister's journal describes finding evidence that the underground complex was being used as a base for activities that extended well beyond the property itself. Fresh tracks leading away from the concealed entrance suggested regular travel to and from the site, and the minister observed signs that supplies and equipment were being transported through the underground passages. His attempts to follow these tracks led him to realize that the underground complex connected to natural cave systems that extended for considerable distances beneath the surrounding landscape. The minister's final entry about his experience at the property describes an encounter that convinced him to leave as soon as weather conditions permitted. On his third night at the site, he was awakened by the sound of someone moving through the ruins of the house above ground. When he investigated, he discovered that someone had been systematically searching through the debris and remaining structures, apparently looking for specific items or information. The minister's account describes observing an individual dressed in dark clothing, who appeared to be intimately familiar with the layout of the property and the location of concealed passages. This person moved with purpose and efficiency, suggesting considerable experience with the site. When the minister attempted to call out and identify himself, the individual disappeared so quickly and completely that the minister began to question whether he had actually seen anyone at all. The minister's journal concludes with his observation that whoever was maintaining and expanding the underground complex had developed sophisticated methods for concealing their activities from casual observation. The systematic nature of their work and the evidence of long-term planning suggested that the property was serving purposes that went far beyond simple shelter or storage. His final entry expresses concern that these activities might be connected to larger plans that posed potential threats to the surrounding community. By the middle of the 1870s, reports about the former Maddox property had become part of local folklore, with stories passed down through families and communities in the region. However, official interest in the site was renewed in 1876, when a series of disappearances in the Sacramento area drew attention back to the mysterious underground complex. 3 individuals, including a local newspaper reporter investigating stories about the property, vanished while conducting research in the area. The newspaper reporter, James Mitchell, of the Sacramento Evening Herald, had been working on a comprehensive article about unsolved disappearances in the region, dating back to the original Maddox case. His editor's notes, preserved in the newspaper's archives, indicate that Mitchell had discovered connections between several missing persons cases that suggested a pattern of disappearances centered on the area around the former Maddox property. Mitchell's research notes, found in his hotel room after his disappearance, reveal that he had identified at least 7 individuals who had vanished while investigating or visiting the abandoned property since 1853. These cases included not only Dr. Blackwood and the Maddox family themselves, but also several treasure hunters, a geological surveyor and a territorial marshal who had attempted to conduct follow-up investigations of the site. The reporter had also discovered evidence suggesting that the underground complex was being used as a headquarters for activities that extended throughout the Sacramento Valley and into the Sierra Nevada mountains. Financial records obtained from local banks indicated regular transactions involving large sums of money and the purchase of mining equipment, supplies, and transportation that could not be accounted for by any legitimate business operations in the area. Mitchell's notes describe his growing conviction that the disappearances were connected to a sophisticated organization that was using the underground complex as a base for operations involving theft, fraud, and possibly violence. His final entries express his intention to conduct a direct investigation of the property, despite warnings from local authorities about the dangers involved. Mitchell was last seen heading toward the former Maddox property on the morning of November 12, 1876. The investigation into Mitchell's disappearance was led by federal marshals, who brought more resources and authority to bear on the mystery than any previous effort. Their search of the underground complex in December 1876 revealed that the passages and chambers had been expanded significantly since previous investigations. The system now included workshops, storage areas, living quarters, and what appeared to be meeting rooms capable of accommodating substantial numbers of people. The Federal Marshal's report describes finding evidence of sophisticated engineering and construction techniques that suggested the involvement of individuals with advanced technical knowledge. The underground complex included ventilation systems, drainage, and even primitive electrical installations that provided lighting for the deeper chambers. The quality of workmanship and the scale of the construction indicated that substantial financial resources had been invested in developing the site. However, the marshals found no trace of current occupants or recent activity. The underground complex appeared to have been abandoned suddenly, with personal belongings, tools and supplies left behind as if the occupants had departed in haste. Evidence suggested that the abandonment had occurred very recently, possibly within days or weeks of the marshal's investigation. The absence of dust or deterioration in many areas indicated that the complex had been actively maintained until very recently. The marshals did make several significant discoveries that shed light on the scope of activities that had been conducted from the underground complex. Document caches found in sealed chambers contained detailed maps of mining claims throughout Northern California, along with records of surveys, assessments and transactions involving properties across the region. These documents suggested that the organization had been systematically acquiring information about valuable mining claims and mineral deposits. Additional documents found in the complex included correspondence with individuals in San Francisco, Portland, and other major cities, indicating that the operation had connections extending throughout the Western Territories. The letters discussed transportation schedules, financial arrangements, and coordination of activities that required precise timing and extensive planning. The scale and sophistication of these operations suggested an organization with substantial resources and influence. The federal investigation concluded with the decision to permanently flood the underground complex to prevent any future use of the facility. However, this effort also proved unsuccessful when it became apparent that the underground system connected to natural drainage that made flooding impossible. Water pumped into the chambers simply flowed away through hidden passages and underground streams. The investigation was officially closed in 1878, with the recommendation that the property be placed under permanent federal restriction. The final chapter of the documented history of the former Maddox property begins in 1879, when the federal government transferred ownership of the land to the Southern Pacific Railroad as part of a larger land grant for railroad construction. The railroad company, unaware of the property's history, initially planned to use the area as a station and supply depot for trains serving the Sacramento Valley. However, these plans were abandoned when construction crews encountered the extensive underground complex. Railroad engineers reported that the underground system posed serious threats to the stability of any surface construction in the area. The numerous chambers and passages had weakened the ground to the point where it could not support the weight of railroad infrastructure. Additionally, the engineers discovered evidence that the underground complex was still being expanded by unknown individuals, despite official efforts to secure the site. The railroad company's final survey of the property, completed in 1880, concluded that the underground system now extended for several miles in multiple directions from the original cellar entrance. The survey team estimated that the complex included hundreds of individual chambers and passages, representing decades of continuous construction and expansion. The engineers noted that the quality of workmanship varied significantly between different areas, suggesting that multiple individuals or groups had contributed to the construction over time. Most significantly, the railroad survey discovered evidence that the underground complex connected to similar systems beneath other properties in the region. These connections suggested that the original Maddox site had served as a central hub for a network of underground facilities extending throughout the Sacramento Valley. The implications of this discovery convinced the railroad company to abandon their plans for the area and to recommend that the federal government conduct a comprehensive investigation of underground activities throughout the region. However, no such investigation was ever undertaken. Federal attention in the early 1880s was focused on more pressing concerns, including conflicts with Native American tribes and the challenges of administering rapidly growing territories. The former Maddox property was simply abandoned, with occasional patrol visits by federal marshals who reported finding no evidence of current activity at the site. The official record of the Maddox mystery ends with a brief notation in federal territorial records from 1882, stating that the property had been declared permanently unsuitable for development or habitation due to unstable ground conditions. The notation makes no reference to the extensive underground complex or the decades of mysterious activities that had been documented at the site. By the time California achieved statehood, the Maddox case had been relegated to a footnote in territorial archives. Yet the story persisted in local memory and occasional reports from individuals who encountered evidence of the underground complex during construction projects or exploration activities in the region. As late as the 1920s, workers digging foundations for buildings in Sacramento occasionally discovered passages and chambers that appeared to be part of the same network that had originated beneath the Maddox property. These discoveries were typically sealed quickly and quietly, with little official documentation or investigation. The fate of Jonah and Rachel Maddox, Dr. Blackwood, James Mitchell, and the numerous other individuals who disappeared in connection with the property was never determined. No bodies were ever recovered. No credible witness accounts of their departure from the area were established, and no evidence of their survival elsewhere was ever documented. They became part of the growing mythology surrounding the property. The names added to local legends about the dangers lurking beneath the seemingly peaceful landscape of the Sacramento Valley. Perhaps most disturbing is the realization that emerged from studying the accumulated documentation about the property. The underground complex represented only the visible portion of activities that may have extended throughout the region and possibly beyond. The evidence suggests that what began as a simple family farm became the center of an organization whose scope, purpose, and ultimate fate remain completely unknown. The records that survive hint at connections between the Maddox property and similar mysteries in other parts of the country during the same period. Reports of unexplained disappearances, mysterious underground activities, and sophisticated criminal organizations surface in territorial records from Colorado, Nevada, and Oregon during the 1850s through 1880s. The pattern suggests that the Sacramento case may have been part of a larger phenomenon that has never been fully investigated or understood. Today, the area where the Maddox property once stood lies beneath a modern shopping center, its dark history buried under concrete and asphalt. The underground complex, if it still exists, remains sealed beneath the foundations of commercial buildings whose occupants are unaware of what lies below. Construction records from the shopping center development in the 1960s mention encountering unusual underground spaces that required additional concrete and steel reinforcement, but these reports were filed away without investigation. The Maddox mystery serves as a reminder that the rapid expansion and development of the American West created countless opportunities for individuals and organizations to operate beyond the reach of effective law enforcement or government oversight. In the chaos and isolation of frontier communities, sophisticated criminal enterprises could establish themselves and operate for years without detection. The underground complex beneath the Maddox property represents the physical evidence of such an enterprise, but its true nature and purpose disappeared along with the people who created and maintained it. The case also illustrates the limitations of historical investigation when dealing with events that were deliberately concealed by those involved. Despite decades of official investigations, academic research, and amateur exploration, the fundamental questions about what happened at the Maddox property remain unanswered. The underground complex stands as a monument to human ingenuity and determination applied to purposes that may never be fully understood. In the end, the most disturbing aspect of the Maddox mystery may not be the disappearances or the underground complex itself, but rather the possibility that similar operations existed throughout the frontier territories without ever being discovered or documented. The evidence suggests that the Sacramento case came to light only because of a combination of unusual circumstances and persistent investigation. How many other families like the Maddoxes simply vanished into the vast wilderness of the American West, leaving no trace of their fate or the forces that claimed them? The silence that surrounds these questions echoes through the archived documents and faded newspaper clippings that preserve the fragments of the Maddox story. It is the silence of frontier isolation, of official indifference, and of secrets that were meant to remain buried beneath the earth. In that silence, the voices of Jonah and Rachel Maddox, Dr. Harrison Blackwood, James Mitchell, and all the others who were drawn into this mystery continue to call out from the darkness beneath the Sacramento Valley, waiting for answers that may never come. The most compelling evidence that the Maddox case represented something larger than an isolated incident emerged in 1884. When a former railroad surveyor named William Chen approached federal authorities in San Francisco with a collection of documents he claimed to have discovered during construction projects throughout Northern California. Chen, who had worked on various infrastructure projects since the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, had noticed patterns in his work that connected seemingly unrelated construction challenges across the region. According to Chen's testimony, preserved in federal territorial records, he had encountered evidence of extensive underground construction at more than 20 different sites between Sacramento and the Oregon border. These discoveries included chambers, passages, storage areas, and workshop facilities that bore striking similarities to the complex found beneath the Maddox property. The consistency of construction techniques and the strategic locations of these sites suggested coordinated planning on a scale that exceeded anything previously documented. Chen's documentation included detailed sketches and measurements of underground facilities discovered during railroad construction, road building, and town development projects. His records showed that many of these sites were connected by natural cave systems and artificially constructed passages, creating a network that spanned hundreds of miles across Northern California. The surveyor estimated that the complete system, if fully mapped, would represent one of the largest underground construction projects ever undertaken in North America. Federal authorities initially dismissed Chen's claims as the fantasies of a man seeking attention for his discoveries. However, a cursory investigation conducted by territorial marshals confirmed several of his reports and discovered additional evidence that supported his broader claims. The investigation team found that construction records from multiple projects contained references to unusual underground conditions and structural modifications required due to existing subsurface installations. The federal investigation expanded when authorities realized that Chen's discoveries correlated with patterns of missing persons reports and unexplained disappearances throughout the region. A systematic review of territorial records revealed dozens of cases similar to the Maddox disappearance, involving individuals who had vanished while investigating mining claims, conducting surveys, or exploring remote areas. The geographic distribution of these disappearances closely matched the locations where Chen had discovered evidence of underground construction. A joint investigation involving federal marshals, territorial authorities, and military engineers was launched in 1885 to conduct a comprehensive assessment of the underground network that Chen had identified. The investigation team, led by Colonel Harrison Fitzgerald of the Army Corps of Engineers, was authorized to use whatever resources necessary to map the extent of the underground system and determine its purpose and origin. Colonel Fitzgerald's team spent 8 months conducting surveys and excavations at sites throughout Northern California. Their work confirmed that an extensive underground network had indeed been constructed over a period of several decades, beginning sometime in the 1840s and continuing through the 1870s. The scale and sophistication of the construction indicated the involvement of skilled engineers, substantial financial resources, and a large workforce operating with remarkable secrecy. The investigation team's final report, classified by federal authorities and not released until 1948, described discoveries that fundamentally changed understanding of frontier-era California. The underground network included not only storage and meeting facilities, but also sophisticated workshops for manufacturing and processing operations, laboratories for chemical and metallurgical work, and communications systems that connected distant sites through telegraph lines running through the underground passages. Most significantly, the investigation team discovered evidence that the underground network had been used to support large-scale mining and extraction operations that bypassed official claims and territorial oversight. Hidden processing facilities found at various sites contained equipment for refining gold, silver, and other precious metals on an industrial scale. Financial records discovered in sealed chambers indicated that these operations had generated enormous profits over a period of more than 30 years. The investigation team also found evidence that the underground network had been used to support other illegal activities, including counterfeiting, smuggling, and the coordination of criminal operations throughout the Western Territories. Document caches discovered at various sites contained detailed records of bribery, intimidation, and violence used to maintain secrecy and eliminate threats to the organization's operations. Colonel Fitzgerald's report identified the underground network as the infrastructure of what he termed the most sophisticated criminal organization ever documented in American territorial history. The report estimated that the organization had controlled mining claims worth millions of dollars, had influenced territorial politics through bribery and intimidation, and had eliminated dozens of individuals who posed threats to their operations. The report also concluded that the organization had disbanded sometime in the late 1870s, apparently in response to increased federal oversight and the establishment of more effective law enforcement in the region. Evidence suggested that the organization's leadership had departed California, possibly relocating to other territories where similar opportunities for clandestine operations existed. The underground facilities had been systematically abandoned and concealed, with efforts made to eliminate evidence of their existence. However, the investigation team made one discovery that suggested the organization's influence had extended beyond their immediate criminal activities. Among the documents found in the deepest chambers of the network were detailed records of individuals who had been recruited, eliminated, or otherwise neutralized to protect the organization's secrets. These records included the names of Jonah and Rachel Maddox, Dr. Harrison Blackwood, James Mitchell, and numerous other individuals whose disappearances had been attributed to accidents or voluntary departures. The records revealed that the Maddox family had discovered the underground complex by accident during their first winter on the property. Rather than being victims of random violence, they had been systematically eliminated because their knowledge of the organization's activities posed an unacceptable security risk. The records included detailed plans for disposing of their bodies and creating the appearance that they had left voluntarily. Dr. Blackwood's disappearance had been planned from the moment his archaeological team arrived at the site. The organization had allowed his investigation to proceed only long enough to determine what he had discovered and who else might possess dangerous knowledge. His elimination had been carried out with the same systematic precision that characterized all of the organization's security operations. The records also revealed that James Mitchell's investigation had come dangerously close to exposing the organization's activities. His disappearance had been coordinated with a broader effort to eliminate potential threats and prepare for the organization's departure from California. The timing of his elimination had been carefully planned to occur after he had completed his research, but before he could publish his findings. Colonel Fitzgerald's investigation team faced a difficult decision about how to handle their discoveries. The evidence they had uncovered documented crimes involving dozens of murders and millions of dollars in theft. But the perpetrators had apparently departed California years earlier. The underground network itself represented a remarkable engineering achievement, but one that had been created for criminal purposes and had been used to support decades of illegal activities. The decision was made to classify the investigation's findings and seal the underground network permanently. The federal government concluded that public revelation of the organization's activities would undermine confidence in territorial law enforcement and potentially inspire similar criminal enterprises. The underground facilities were filled with concrete, and official records of their existence were restricted to the highest levels of federal administration. The classification of the Fitzgerald investigation meant that the families of the disappeared individuals were never informed about the true fate of their relatives. The Maddox case remained officially unsolved, along with dozens of similar disappearances throughout the region. The victims of the organization's activities were denied justice, and their stories were relegated to local folklore and unexplained mysteries. However, some evidence of the investigation's findings eventually reached the public through unofficial channels. In 1892, a series of articles appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle describing the discovery of extensive criminal operations in Northern California during the territorial period. The articles, written by an unnamed source with apparent access to federal documents, provided enough detail to identify connections to the Maddox case and other unexplained disappearances. The Chronicle articles generated significant public interest, but were quickly suppressed through legal action by federal authorities. Most copies of the newspapers containing the articles were confiscated, and the author was never identified. However, some individuals had preserved copies of the articles, and these documents eventually found their way into private collections and local historical societies. Additional evidence about the organization's activities surfaced periodically over the following decades, usually when construction or development projects encountered remnants of the underground network that had escaped federal efforts to seal them. In 1906, workers building the foundation for a bank in Sacramento discovered a sealed chamber containing documents and equipment that clearly belonged to the organization described in the Fitzgerald investigation. The 1906 discovery included financial records showing that the organization had maintained accounts in banks throughout the western United States and had invested their profits in legitimate businesses and real estate. The records indicated that former members of the organization had successfully transitioned to respectable roles in business and politics, using wealth accumulated through their criminal activities to establish themselves in new communities. Perhaps most disturbing was evidence that the organization had not simply disbanded, but had evolved into other forms. Correspondence found in the 1906 cache suggested that former members had maintained contact and had collaborated on new ventures in other regions. References to associates in Colorado and operations in the Dakota Territory indicated that the organization's expertise in clandestine operations had been applied to new opportunities as the frontier expanded westward. The final documented discovery related to the organization occurred in 1923, when a mining accident in the Sierra Nevada exposed chambers and passages that contained evidence of the organization's activities. Among the materials recovered from this site were personal effects that were positively identified as belonging to several individuals who had disappeared in the Sacramento area during the 1870s, including items that had belonged to Dr. Blackwood and James Mitchell. The 1923 discovery confirmed that the organization had maintained execution sites separate from their operational facilities. The evidence suggested that individuals who posed security threats were transported to remote locations for elimination, with their remains disposed of in ways that would prevent discovery. This finding explained why no bodies had ever been recovered from the Maddox property or other sites associated with the organization's activities. By the 1920s, most of the individuals who might have possessed first-hand knowledge of the organization were deceased. The few surviving documents and artifacts related to their activities had been scattered among various archives and private collections, making comprehensive investigation impossible. The organization's success in maintaining secrecy during their operational period had ensured that their ultimate fate remained as mysterious as their origins. The legacy of the organization extends beyond their immediate criminal activities to their influence on the development of law enforcement and security measures in the Western Territories. The Fitzgerald investigation led to significant changes in federal oversight of territorial affairs and the establishment of more sophisticated intelligence-gathering capabilities. The organization's success in operating undetected for decades had exposed serious weaknesses in territorial administration that needed to be addressed. The case also influenced the development of modern investigative techniques and inter-agency cooperation. The complexity of the organization's operations and the scale of their activities demonstrated the need for coordinated law enforcement efforts that could address criminal enterprises operating across multiple jurisdictions. Many of the investigative approaches developed during the Fitzgerald investigation became standard practices in federal law enforcement. However, the classification of the investigation's findings meant that these lessons were not widely shared or applied. Local law enforcement agencies continued to struggle with similar problems without access to the knowledge that had been gained through the investigation of the underground network. The secrecy that had been intended to protect public confidence instead perpetuated the conditions that had allowed the organization to operate successfully. The human cost of the organization's activities and the subsequent cover-up cannot be calculated precisely, but it certainly included dozens of deaths and the destruction of numerous families. The Maddox family, Dr. Blackwood, James Mitchell, and many others were eliminated simply because they had accidentally discovered information that threatened the organization's security. Their deaths were carefully planned and executed to appear as accidents or voluntary disappearances. The families of these victims spent years searching for answers and hoping for the return of their missing relatives. They were never informed that their loved ones had been murdered or told where their remains might be found. The official silence surrounding these cases compounded their suffering and denied them the closure that might have come from learning the truth about what had happened. The organization's success in eliminating witnesses and concealing evidence also meant that their other victims were never identified or acknowledged. Workers who had been employed in the underground facilities, individuals who had been recruited as informants or collaborators, and others who had become liabilities were eliminated with the same systematic efficiency that characterized all of the organization's operations. The true scope of the organization's activities may never be fully understood. The evidence that has been preserved suggests that their operations extended far beyond what was documented in the Fitzgerald investigation. References in recovered documents to associates in other territories and similar operations in the East indicate that the California network may have been part of a larger criminal enterprise that spanned the entire continent. The sophisticated nature of the organization's operations also raises questions about their origins and leadership. The level of planning, engineering expertise, and financial resources required for their activities suggests the involvement of individuals with significant education and experience. These were not ordinary criminals, but highly intelligent and capable people who had chosen to use their abilities for illegal purposes. Some historians have speculated that the organization may have included former military officers displaced by the end of the Civil War who had applied their strategic and tactical knowledge to criminal enterprises. Others have suggested connections to European criminal organizations or to legitimate businesses that had used illegal methods to gain competitive advantages in the frontier economy. The question of what happened to the organization's leadership and their accumulated wealth remains unanswered. The financial records discovered during various investigations indicated that they had amassed enormous profits from their operations, but these funds were never recovered by federal authorities. The money apparently disappeared along with the organization's leadership, possibly financing their transition to legitimate activities in new locations. The legacy of the Maddox mystery extends beyond its immediate historical significance to its impact on our understanding of frontier justice and the development of American law enforcement. The case demonstrates how criminal organizations could exploit the isolation and weak governmental oversight of frontier territories to conduct large-scale illegal operations. It also shows how official secrecy and classification could perpetuate injustice by preventing the families of victims from learning the truth about their fate. The story serves as a reminder that the settlement of the American West was not simply a matter of individual pioneers seeking new opportunities, but involved complex criminal enterprises that exploited the chaos and opportunity of frontier conditions. The organization behind the Maddox disappearances represents the dark side of westward expansion, showing how the same conditions that enabled legitimate settlement and development also provided cover for sophisticated criminal activities. Today, more than a century after the last documented evidence of the organization's activities was discovered, the Maddox mystery continues to haunt the landscape of Northern California. The shopping centers, residential developments, and commercial buildings that now occupy the sites of their former operations stand as monuments to the transformation of the frontier into modern civilization. But beneath the asphalt and concrete, the sealed chambers and passages of the underground network remain as physical evidence of a criminal enterprise that shaped the history of the region in ways that are still not fully understood. The silence that once protected the organization's secrets has been replaced by the noise of traffic and commerce. But the fundamental questions about their activities and ultimate fate remain unanswered. The voices of Jonah and Rachel Maddox, Dr. Harrison Blackwood, James Mitchell, and all the others who disappeared into the organization's web of secrecy and violence continue to call out from the past, seeking the justice that was denied to them in life, and the recognition that their sacrifice helped expose one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in American history. In the end, the Maddox mystery stands as a testament to the power of human curiosity and determination to uncover the truth, even when that truth has been buried beneath layers of official secrecy and deliberate concealment. The investigators, journalists, and amateur historians who have pieced together fragments of the story over the past century and a half have ensured that the victims of this criminal organization are not forgotten, and that their stories continue to serve as warnings about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of transparency in government and law enforcement. The underground chambers, where Jonah Maddox conducted his fateful investigations, where Dr. Blackwood made his final discoveries, and where dozens of others met their end, remain sealed beneath the earth. But their story lives on in the documents and testimonies that have survived, serving as a reminder that even the most carefully concealed crimes will eventually be exposed by those who refuse to accept official explanations and who continue to seek the truth, no matter how long it takes or how deeply it has been buried.